Hello, my name is John Reynolds. On this episode of Extraordinary Life Stories, I'm talking with Annie Lush. Annie is an Olympian, a world champion sailor, and a 3 times round-the-world racer. What is your image of sailing? If it's a fuddy-duddy and boring idea of gently wafting along in a light breeze, then Annie's version of sailing is very, very different. Technical advancements and the level of competitiveness is more associated with Formula One racing, let alone the G-forces she endures, even while she tries to get some sleep. Each round-the-world race is 45,000 nautical miles long. Clearly her experience of endurance and discipline positions her well as an expert on teamwork under pressure, working with leaders to build resilient and high-performing teams. I want to know how that has been affected now she's a mother, and how she prepares for weeks at sea with the inherent dangers posed by an unpredictable and potentially dangerous ocean. This is going to be a fascinating conversation. I'm really looking forward to talking with Annie. Annie, thank you for joining me.
Welcome.
Tell me, who is Annie Lush?
That's a question.
Only you can answer it.
I suppose professionally really known as being a sailor.
Yeah.
Started off very young, but as an Olympic sailor and then going into offshore sailing.
In a big way.
Yeah, quite a bit of offshore miles.
Yeah.
But also a mum, which is a new challenge a few years ago. And and then I work quite a lot in education as well.
Yeah.
Particularly working with women and girls in sport and outside of that as well. So I think that's my passion part.
Oh, actually, we'll come to that. As a dad of 2 daughters, I want to open that up. But take me back to a young Annie growing up. What did you actually want to be? What did you aspire to do?
I think I wanted to be a politician.
Really?
Yeah.
You still can.
And then actually when I was 18, I had a gap year.
Yeah.
But I worked for a Japanese NGO, actually, a sort of peace organisation, a charity working with peace education. And then I decided I wanted to work for an NGO.
Okay.
But at university, I ended up doing a bit too much sport, actually rowing a lot. And I did the boat race in 2001 on the River Thames.
Yeah.
And we won it by, I think it's still the smallest ever recorded margin.
Amazing.
Being in that 8 and part of that team, I was desperate to go to the Olympics after that. And so the sort of NGO project's been on hold, but I'm going to come back to it.
Interesting. So you really did have a choice of the kind of academic route or sport, and you had to make a choice because one potentially is really quite financially lucrative. The other one, clearly, because we're going to cover it now, but there's not a lot of money in the sport unless you're at the very top, and even then it's a battle. So did that go through your mind, or were you just so relentlessly driven and enjoying the passion, if you like, from the sport you were doing?
Yeah, I don't think I thought about the financial side, and I don't know if I did for a very long time until now I have a family. I realised that perhaps having a pension would have been a useful thing, things like that.
Yeah, sure. You don't think about that though at the age at all, but then maybe that's a good thing because ultimately you've gone on to be incredibly successful what you've done. But talk me about the journey, because before we ultimately filming today, I know that you were saying that you were sort of number 2 in the country, and yet you were earning 10 grand a year or something, which for that sort of level of achievement, it's not representative of really what you're earning.
Yeah, well, Olympic sport is luckily now funded by the lottery, so there is some support, but for sure when I was in it back in those days, it was quite hard to qualify for that, so you really needed to be in the sort of top 8 in the world before you started getting funding. It's gone a bit further down now. But that's quite hard to get to, so that's a few years for sure with no support. And then at the top level, I don't know what it is now, but it's probably still not very much. The salary you draw is quite low, and often any extra money you had, you'd agree often with your teammates to put some of your salary towards the costs as well, because our sport is quite expensive. And you're mostly worried about your campaign costs and buying in a better coach or buying a new sail, whatever you can. So
to be competitive, to be successful.
You remortgage a house, you do whatever you need to do to get there.
Yeah. And in context of the journey you went through from Olympian to round the world race, which I think is 45,000 nautical miles each one. So so you must have covered a phenomenal amount of miles. Talk to me about the sort of decision making you made in terms of where you wanted to sail. You got the passion for it, but in terms of how you actually decided where to go and what to do. Talk to me about that.
I think, in honesty, my goal has actually always been the America's Cup, which is something I've not competed in.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, there haven't been any women in the America's Cup since I set that goal. But in the Olympic team, I sailed in the biggest boat there was. We were 3 women in a boat, and that was the biggest team there could be. And I love working in a team. I think I find that really interesting and challenging, but that's probably one of the parts I love the most about the sailing I do. And so there's a race formerly known as the Whitbread, and then the Volvo Ocean Race, now the Ocean Race, which is a fully crewed around the world race. And I was actually competing in an event, training for the Olympics, when I saw them coming into one of the stopovers in Brazil, and the camaraderie, not only within the teams, but between the teams. And I don't know, it just looked like the most incredible team sport event I'd ever seen. And I thought, okay, I want a piece of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So interesting that you've said that no woman has competed in the America's Cup. Why?
Yeah, or that in history, but not in the recent cup.
Yeah.
I think the perception in sport and in sailing in particular is, that there's physical hurdles, which I think we're slowly managing to break down that idea, because while there are physical hurdles, especially with modern technology and the way that we sail boats now, it doesn't really come down to that. I mean, sailing is a combination of chess on water and physicality.
Yeah. And
depending on your position on the boat, whether you're a sort of decision maker or you're someone pulling things, that changes, but also on the type of boat. Yeah. And actually some of the guys that are now winning these sort of solo around the world races, when you meet them, they're these tiny Frenchmen. So the argument that you need to be 90 kilos and male and is kind of eroding. But I think that's the initial blocker. But really on top of that, it's just been that somehow we became segregated, and actually more so in the kind of 90s and 2000s than in history, because sailing is a really unique sport. I mean, you don't push the boat along, the wind does. So men and women can compete completely equally in this sport. Even Paralympians, also I've raced in training for the Olympics with Paralympians as well, and it doesn't really matter on your physicality for a lot of the sport. So I think that it's that somehow we've become segregated, and we're not known by lots of the guys. And I think this is one of the biggest things. You pull in the people that you trust, that you believe in. Yeah. And women have kind of not been inside that network. And then, of course, they don't get the skills, they don't get the opportunities.
This
and
is experience,
then they don't know how to sail these
changing?
fast boats.
Is there a kind of movement that you feel, was that still stuck in its ways?
Oh, it is definitely changing.
Good.
Particularly in very recent history. I mean, there have been attempts to really push it and to change it with certain, Tracy Edwards and Dawn Riley and various female skippers in the past that tried to do something. I competed in an all-female team in 2014, 15 around the world. And after that, we made a project called the Magenta Project, which I'm one of the founders of. And that was really to try and build this network of women around the world to kind of, and get allies to help get in the door. It's incredible, since we were trying to do that in 2015, which it felt like we were really pushing against a door that didn't want to open. Then the Me Too movement happened. Lots of things in the world have changed, and now that door is definitely opening.
That's good.
But it's for sure.
No,
it's still a door there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a crossover. We were talking before. I've got 2 daughters, 12 and 14, and I want them to grow up feeling that they can do anything they want without any glass ceilings or any restrictions. And so just hearing that, let alone the fact that the Magenta Project, the fact that you're ultimately actively trying to change that in all the things that you're doing is so important, because this whole physical, lack of physical side of things that stops females being able to do certain sports is nonsense. And it's silly how much it's still being talked about in 2024.
And also the idea that all women or all men are the same. I mean, often I'm racing against, I'm quite a big female, I suppose, and and weight wise, and often I'm racing against men quite a lot smaller than me, and perhaps so it's also this sort of idea that you can categorize people by gender or any other category you want to put on it, which doesn't necessarily apply.
Yeah, I get that.
With physicality as well as their mental aspects. So
and the other thing you touched on, and I mentioned it when I introduced the program actually, is that sailing can be associated with a sort of almost an old-fashioned, slow, fuddy-duddy sport. It's quite the opposite in your world, right? I mean, the technical advancements being made in sailing consistently, the materials being used, how to harness the wind. You must have seen such a transition through your career. And it just keeps evolving to be faster, more competitive. So in context, though, that's also meaning that potentially there's less pulling, technology is being used and so on. So it eliminates that argument of physicality. But how have you seen that advancements and how have you been involved in that?
Yeah, that's another really cool part, I think, of the sport. Obviously, I'm very passionate about sailing, but yeah, the advancement in technology and the materials and then the weight, which is really important to us. The latest thing is that we're always foiling now in any fast boat, so we don't sit on the water anymore. We're basically flying.
Yeah.
And so in fact,
it takes all the friction away, right?
So we go a lot faster. And so the last race I did around the world was actually on foils. So a lot of what we're thinking about is a lot more to do with aerodynamics and hydrodynamics these days, which is a big shift. But I mean, if you could just compare the last race, which I did around the world last year, compared to 2017-18, I mean, this time we were with an autopilot, because when we're foiling, we're going so fast, it's impossible to be on the deck. So you can steer sometimes, but you can't drive all the time. So you're basically driving a machine.
So it's a big computer.
Yeah.
Wow.
And you need to know how to input into that. And I mean, at the beginning for me, it was a big change. I think the younger guys obviously found it a bit easier to adapt.
Well, of course.
But I'm used to.
You come through Android.
And so for me, normally offshore, you have a number of drivers, you rotate. And when someone comes on and they can't get the numbers, we always have our performance numbers up, our polars, what we're trying to achieve. Mm-hmm. We know what we should be trying to get, even if we can't see another boat next to us, which offshore you can't always.
No.
You're driving to that, and someone comes on and they don't really get it, or they're getting tired, and you sort of help them out. You speak to them, maybe give them a Mars bar, try and get them in the groove. Then suddenly there we had this autopilot. I named her Rosie. I needed to at least give her, it was definitely a girl because she was good. I gave her a name, but I had to work out how to talk to Rosie in code, which is very different to a human.
Is there, sailing, ultimately you're right out in the middle of the ocean. You're relying on a computer. Is there a sort of a fail-safe where certain things are going to stop working? Because ultimately in previous years, you're relying on the equipment and you can fix this. Because if there's a computer shutdown and you're right out in the middle of the ocean in a big swell, how do you mitigate that? Can you switch to manual, or is this, because I know like in Formula 1, for example, they can't start the car without a certain machine and so on, and they're stricken. But out in the ocean, it's a whole different ramification.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I mean, yes, you can switch to manual, but it's hard. And there were definitely times where I just wished that all that technology was gone and we could just sail the boat normally.
Yeah.
And it was quite interesting because the younger guys in the team, sort of like the belief they had in the technology was higher, which sometimes is good because they were better at probably having the patience to give the technology the time to learn, which I didn't feel so happy to do.
I see. It's quite an interesting viewpoint. Yeah.
But they had quite a strong reliance on it. And then I suppose that's, where it's always good, I think, to have a very diverse team. I was the oldest person on this boat, and which feels amazing. That happens quickly, doesn't it? When you go from really young into the oldest person. Yeah. But there were for sure situations where I felt we needed to really be prepared for the risk and what could happen and what are our strategies in that situation.
No, it's interesting.
But I think we do that a lot as sailors. I mean, that when you go offshore, of course, when you're Olympic sailing, you need these strategies too. But when you're going to places where, we go to Point Nemo, we go to places where no one can get to us, probably 10 days away from the nearest point of contact to a human. Yeah. We're closer to someone in space for quite a lot of the race than we are to someone on land. So you have to be prepared for that, and you have to have plenty of what-if scenarios.
Yes,
and
they're
in your mind, because to win first you've got to get somewhere.
Yeah.
So it's that's a big part of that game, and it's managing the risk and being adaptable, because it never works out how you planned.
No, of course.
Or how the technology planned.
No, and you've got that alongside the unpredictability of the ocean and the weather itself, right? And just asking straight up, have you had a situation where it's all gone really wrong, waves come over, mast broken, and so on, and you actually genuinely thinking this might be it? Because it's literally, there are moments in context of what you're doing where it's really dangerous.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've had a couple of those.
Yeah, thought you might. Yeah.
Just this last race, we had two instances. One in the going into the Southern Ocean, where our boat actually started to delaminate, which is basically it's breaking. The boat's made out of carbon, and it's made out of a sort of a shell structure. So there's a actually very thin piece of carbon, about 2 mil, and then some foam, and then another piece of 2 mil carbon. Right. And when they're sandwiched together, they're super strong.
Yes.
But if one of those starts to come unstuck, basically, you're living in the Southern Ocean on a piece of 2 mil carbon, which is cracking.
It's terrifying.
And so that started to happen, and we were very fortunate with the weather window to be able to nurse the boat back to Cape Town. I mean, not fortunate that we had to stop that leg, but to get home. So that was the first time I had to go and get the survival suits out on deck, which is the first step in preparation to get off. And unfortunately, we had another incident later in the leg where we broke our mast in a big North Atlantic low pressure in the Atlantic. We were trying to get to New York, basically, and we ended up without a mast, and I think that was a pretty difficult situation. I knew that in the low pressure we were in, for sure, no rescue services could come into that. So losing the mast is not ideal. It's slow and you can't get anywhere. But worse in that situation is that when the mast falls over the side of the boat, it's attached to the boat by quite a lot of things, and it tries to punch its way through the boat. Oof. So the first thing is you've lost the mast, but the real situation is that you might start to sink very soon, and that's
you've got to cut that loose. You've got to get it. Yeah, and that's dangerous in itself, clambering around ropes and so on. Gosh,
yeah, we had about 55 knots of wind across the deck, so it's like standing in a very big storm on a very unstable platform, and there's just stuff flying everywhere. So trying to cut it off is pretty dangerous, and you've got to do it fast.
And the relevance of that being a recent race, you've just said when you introduced it, you're a mother. Now, previously, all these things, ultimately, it's kind of you that can have, the responsibility side of things resting with you. Has that changed a certain amount of your mindset of what you're doing, how you're doing it, and what you might be doing next in terms of more racing and so on? Because that must play on your mind a little bit.
Yeah, it's true. And people say that when you become a parent, your sort of assessment of risk changes, which I think it does.
Sure.
In the context of the sailing, perhaps I feel prepared for those situations because that's what we train to do.
Yeah.
And of course there is risk, and you know that, but you've sort of decided to go there, and you know what you're going to do in those situations. Yeah. And I think there's plenty of risk in the rest of everyday life.
I get that.
But I actually did watch a film just before I started this race about Jessica Watson, who sailed around the world by herself. And it showed the family at home and how stressed they were. This sounds a bit stupid, but it's the first time I really appreciated
flipped it to the other side.
Yeah. It's not about, I don't feel so nervous out there. I feel like we're prepared. But when your family at home start to learn of what's happening to you, in the race before that, I broke my back actually. And I know my parents learned of that, and I was still in the middle of the Southern Ocean, a long way from land. I was fine.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't ideal, but fine. No, I get it. But after the race, I realized how worried they were. Yeah. And I think, now, as you're saying, with my own family, I mean, putting that pressure on my husband and my daughter, who's now is starting to understand the risk. Sure. You feel that guilt, do they need to go through that? And that's something I
get that.
I'm asking myself.
But this experience you've got, this incredible harnessing of discipline, teamwork, who you choose to go sailing at sea with must be really quite important to you, because your life's at risk, and if the things turn bad, you need to know that everyone's got the right amount of experience and camaraderie, and that's a key thing, let alone the fact that all this experience is transferable into business, into life. And so I know that kind of operation, sort of high performance from a team point of view, you actually do talks and mentoring into that space. Is that something you want to do more of and are planning on doing more of, which potentially is less sailing and away from the family?
Yeah, I think it was very fun to work through those lessons and see how they apply in other ways. And I've really enjoyed doing that with different projects, whether it's business or charities or in schools. And I think anyone who gets to do sport as a career for a long time, especially as I have, because sailing's quite a long career, we're very lucky to have the opportunity to dive so deep into something that perhaps you don't get to do in business and learn those lessons. So yeah, I enjoy doing that, and I would like to do more of that. And I think in what you're saying about teamwork, I mean, if I could say the biggest thing I've learned from all of this, then it's to do with working in a team and learning about myself. I think a friend of mine said, when you go to sea, you try to become a better sailor, but you also try to become a better person. And I think for sure the ocean race, I mean, 45,000 miles later, you're not the same.
No. And it's that sense of connectivity as well, where, it's you've got a group of people around you all trying to achieve the same goal, working with each other, and you potentially not going to always be agreeing, right? But actually, you've got to get there. So you've got to work out how to work with this person, that person. Maybe this person's the right mediator, and I guess that's all going on. And there's leadership there. There's patience. There's empathy. It's all massive life skills, let alone business skills, which you must have in spades, because it's dangerous if not.
I don't think I've got them resolved yet. If I did, this would be the golden ticket.
No one does, but you'll have those skills. You have to have got through the situations and manage the boat, get to the destination, and all whilst trying to win. So you're actually trying to operate at that high performance, which makes you formidable in that sense of learning from in business and also in life. Being a mother, those skills must be incredible, because one thing that I find so frustrating is the whole academic side of things in schools is pretty archaic, but some of these leadership qualities, some of these things, empathy, it's disappearing. Kids are losing the empathy from being on social media. They can send messages on Snapchat. There's no accountability. But you've got that to be able to just always pass on. And do you do much with schools? Do you find that you're in schools doing motivational talks about things like that you've achieved?
Yeah, I've worked on a couple of different projects in schools, and I really enjoy that. But I am actually also a teacher. So I actually teach GCSE geography part-time. It's something I've done since COVID and being a mum to try and and what you were saying there is the thing about accountability. You're right. In fact, one of my year 9, one of my 14-year-old students the other day asked me, Annie, would you like to be our age again? And I had to say, no, I'm sorry, I wouldn't. And because I quite like my body to be that young again, because it's much easier to go to the gym.
But what they're going through.
But I don't even understand, in fact, their world now. And it seems that, the respect for time and for things being solid, they just seem to move all the time. And it's quite hard for them to, I'm sure I'm also just being a bit old here, and there's a way of adapting to it. But it looks very, very hard.
But you've got perspective. I'm 46, so in context, clearly didn't have social media growing up and so on. And I'm now dad to these 2 kids growing up that they have these skills because we've put in. But there's so many kids that potentially growing up around parents that are particularly busy with work or just don't have that enough kind of empathy skills to pass on. And then actually it's a kind of a changing world of that, which is a little bit scary.
It is scary. And I think it's not all doom and gloom. I think there's ways around it, but if you're trying to find a solution, I would recommend going offshore, because one of the joys for me of doing the ocean race, although that is changing now with satellite being even better and cheaper, but fundamentally the phone is on shore and it's gone. It's 38 days focusing on just trying to make a boat go fast. We don't get dressed, we don't make food. And we don't have email, we don't have phones. We're not, it's gone. You get to focus 100% on the job you're doing.
Very few jobs or places or things you could do where that actually happens. So I get that. You've achieved a lot of success. There's a lot of things that you just say bumps along the way and so on, but ultimately you've had great success. And I'd love to know, sitting here now, what your definition of success is and what a young Annie coming through the Olympic side in particular, how you define success then?
I think I'd have to disagree with you on that success. There's been some.
There's
been a lot of failing as well. mostly failing, which is the nature of committing to compete in anything,
yes,
I think.
But failures get you to success, right? So, I mean, ultimately, you learn from them, you build your resilience. It's been talked about a lot more, it's cliche, but in context of yours, you could have stopped or given up at any time. You already said in more recent times, you broke your back.
Yeah.
And yet you're already probably still considering where the next race is and so on, so it's just, but no, I think you get where I'm going with it. It's like, because I know you're particularly humble, but just, that definition of success fascinates me from your point of view.
Obviously, when I was young, success for a long time, for 10 years for me, was going to the Olympics and winning a gold medal. Yeah. And it wasn't just going to the Olympics, because in the British team, in the sailing team, we're quite successful. So that isn't the definition of success. Yeah. And it was being the best in the world and winning a gold medal. And I was pretty narrow-minded, focused on that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, at all costs. Yeah. Now in my 40s, realizing perhaps I didn't, amass the wealth or pension or anything that my friends did that I was at university with. I missed many weddings and many important events and relationships. And I mean, everything was second to that. Everything was second to that. I learned along the way a bit that you need to learn to enjoy the journey. I remember someone saying this to me at my first Olympic trial, saying, don't focus on this so much, someone older. The first lady I raced with, called Kathy Foster, and saying, appreciate that we're here. We're at the World Championships, and how cool is that? And at the time thinking, what? Don't focus on that. We're here. We're going to win this thing. We're going to qualify for the Olympics. But that started to ring true. And by the time I did compete in the Olympics in 2012, we did take a moment when we sailed out there to sail around the bay. It's a home games. We're from Dorset, my whole team, in fact, and just to, yes. But then I think I was still pretty obsessed with winning. Yeah. I did start to use. There's an expression not created by me, but a famous line, which is, "I couldn't wait for success, so I went ahead without it." I think that's the first sort of step to realizing that. I realized that when I was younger, it was like, okay, do your GCSEs, get the results. Do your A-levels, get to top university, get the top degree. And it was almost like you had to keep crossing and achieving that step to get to the next step. And the realization that in life, it doesn't necessarily work like that. No. I couldn't wait for a gold medal to then be able to take the next step, to then, have a family. Or it was sort of, for me, everything needed to hold until I was allowed to step to the next level. Like I had to succeed this big thing. Yeah. So it's a slow realization that isn't how it works. There's plenty of ways of getting there. No. And then I think, in the after sailing around the world a couple of times, after breaking my back, actually, in that team, not to do with breaking my back, but I think I was one of the first women to sail in that team, and it was quite hard, and it was a big cost to keep trying to forge the way, actually. Yeah. And then I had a baby, and I tried to hide the fact really that I was having a baby. I was nervous I wouldn't get any work, and that's interesting. And I think it took me a couple of years. In fact, I regret the first year of having, not of having her, but that first year, because I took so many flights. I kept working just to show I was still there.
Almost overcompensating.
Yeah, that I wasn't hindered by having a child, because that's perception in sport. And then I had a big reassessment, and realized now that I can only be in teams that want everything that I am, and and with the family, and I mean, I think this is something you get with age.
I was going to say, it comes with maturity. You're not going to think like that as a younger Annie. And actually, sort of a question I wanted to ask you is, as an aspiring young sailor, female particularly, coming through now, looking at you as someone that they have heard of and seen the success you've had and experience you've got, what advice would you give to them?
I think the first one, which isn't a popular thing, but is that you can't have it all. You can't have it all at the same time. And I think perhaps I felt the pressure to be able to do that. I mean,
I think we all do that, though, in context. And again, some of this comes with maturity, which is the whole point of reflecting. And then part of what you try and do as a teacher, as an experienced sailor, is but it's not always easy to absorb that as a youngster, because you could be so driven on the goal or the achievement you're trying to make. So how that's explained and how that's allowed to then manifest is crucial.
And in that sense, sometimes you have to drop some balls to focus on something. Yeah. I don't think I regret sort of how single-minded I was about the Olympics. I mean, someone once said to me, you can't want to go to the Olympics, you have to need to go or you'll never get there.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think there is a truth in that when you're aiming for that sort of height in sport. But yeah, on the other hand, don't let everything else go. You know, you have to keep something for yourself. You become like a nomad because you're traveling around the world.
Yeah.
You still need to keep some sense of home, family, friends. And and I think some sort of grounding, because perhaps, I don't know if things have changed, but I think, you know, the opportunity now, especially in Olympic sport, is to, because of funding, almost it's helped. You can focus solely on that, but there's a real danger. There's a lot of younger kids now I see stopping school at 16 or not going to university because they're so focused on going to the Olympics. And it's quite hard to explain to them, well, it's a small chance you're going to get there. Yeah. Not that you shouldn't put everything into doing it, but does it matter if you spend another 2 years and finish your studies or not? And, you know, not that studying is everything, but whatever it is. Yeah. And now I feel like there's somehow, you know, we're so focused on putting everything into something that it's a bit of a risk.
Yeah, and also it's the whole, like, actually, do you have a fallback? And a lot of people say, you know, the only reason why I succeeded is because I didn't have a plan B. But there's an element of the maturity of, like, what happens if you don't get there because it's such a small percentage? Will that crush you? Or will you embrace the fact that actually you're probably, you know, by being athletically fit and learning the mindset, actually you're setting yourself up to be able to do other things, but you might not achieve that goal. That probably doesn't rub with some people. It's like, are you telling me I'm not going to achieve my goal? Because I am. And then you've got to let them go with it. So it's a tricky one. But
when you lose, the problem is when you lose, because you will lose, you'll fail many, many times trying to win. Yeah. So in that moment when you lose, if it's everything, if it's absolutely everything, that loss, you take it so hard. Yeah, sure. It can be, you know, it's quite hard to go forward from it sometimes. And, you know, you have to get really good at losing. Yeah. You have to get really good at failing and being able to then take the lessons and go forward. And I think if somehow that race meant too much to you, it's hard to do that. I don't know. Yeah.
No, I love the way you explained that. I think that's really valuable. And I know you've left your family flying from Mallorca to come specifically to film with me today. So thank you, because it means a lot. I've been really looking forward to speaking to you, but that's all we've got time for. So Annie, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks very much, John. It's been a pleasure.